The world of royalty has always been a stage where silence speaks louder than words, where carefully polished appearances hide storms brewing behind gilded doors. But this time, the silence didn't hold. It broke. And what followed was not just another rumor in the endless cycle of royal speculation. It was an alleged leak that sent shockwaves through both sides of the Atlantic, shaking the already fragile narrative surrounding Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. No official palace statement confirmed it. No spokesperson fully denied it. And that vacuum, familiar yet dangerous, was enough to ignite a firestorm. Because when the words "secrets exposed" began circulating online, they didn't just trend, they detonated. It began, according to unnamed sources, with a file. Not a dramatic suitcase exchange or a cinematic confrontation, but a digital drop. A series of encrypted messages allegedly sent to multiple media outlets simultaneously. The contents were not immediately public, but the teasing fragments were enough. Private disagreements inside the Montecito residence, contradictions between public narrative and private reality, concerns over trust, image control, and media strategy. And then the line that changed everything. The couple is not aligned on what comes next. Within hours, tabloids, blogs, and royal watchers exploded into speculation. Was this about their future in America, their financial empire, or something far more personal? Nobody knew for sure, but everyone had an opinion. In the quiet, palm-lined streets of Montecito, life is usually insulated from chaos. Privacy is the currency there. Celebrities retreat there to disappear, not to become headlines. But according to the alleged leak narrative, even that sanctuary was cracking. The story painted a picture, unverified but widely circulated, of increasing tension between Prince Harry and Meghan Markle behind closed doors. One version claimed Harry had grown increasingly uneasy about their media strategy, particularly the constant cycle of revelations, interviews, documentaries, and commentary that kept their names in global headlines. Another version suggested Meghan felt constrained, frustrated that their story was being softened or reframed in ways she did not approve. The contradiction was immediate. Two people, once united by a shared mission to control their narrative, now allegedly pulling in different directions. But again, none of it confirmed. Only whispers amplified by the internet's hunger for royal drama. The most explosive part of the alleged situation wasn't just the content, it was the source. Rumors swirled that the leak did not come from outside. It came from within. Some speculated a former aide, someone once close to the couple during their transition out of royal duties. Others pointed toward internal media partners, suggesting contractual disputes had escalated into retaliation. And then came the most dangerous theory of all, that the leak originated from a trusted circle. This single idea turned a messy rumor into a psychological battlefield, because trust, once questioned, does not easily return. Prince Harry has spent much of his adult life navigating the impossible intersection of public duty and personal trauma. For him, media intrusion is not abstract. It is lived experience. So when the alleged leak surfaced, sources claimed his reaction was immediate and intense, not explosive in public, not dramatic on camera, but deeply internal. Those circulating the story described him as withdrawn, focused, and unusually quiet. A man reassessing not just the situation, but the entire structure around him. One unnamed observer claimed, this wasn't anger, it was calculation, like he was trying to figure out where the breach actually was. If true, it suggested something more serious than a simple disagreement. It suggested suspicion. And suspicion inside a marriage, especially one already under global scrutiny, changes everything. Meghan Markle, meanwhile, did what she has often done in moments of intense speculation. She said nothing, and in silence, the internet filled the gap. Some interpreted her silence as control, an intentional refusal to feed the cycle. Others saw it as calculation, a strategic pause while assessing the media fallout. But another narrative quickly emerged online, that Meghan was unbothered, focused on business commitments and forward-facing projects, refusing to be drawn into yet another royal-linked controversy. The truth, of course, remained unknown. But in the absence of facts, perception becomes reality. And perception was spiraling. Within 24 hours, the alleged leak became a global talking point. Headlines multiplied. Royal Rift 2.0? Harry and Meghan under pressure again. Behind the Montecito walls, social media amplified every angle. Analysts dissected body language from old interviews. Fans and critics clashed in comment sections. YouTube channels produced hour-long breakdowns of hidden meaning in past statements. The cycle was familiar but intensified, because this wasn't just about celebrity gossip. It was about a couple who had once stepped away from the institution of monarchy itself, claiming independence, and now appeared to be facing internal strain in full public view. Buckingham Palace, traditionally quick to distance itself from Sussex-related controversies, remained notably quiet. No denial, no clarification, no comment. And that silence was interpreted in multiple ways. Some believed it meant the palace was uninvolved and uninterested. Others saw it as strategic distance, allowing the situation to unfold without royal interference. But conspiracy-minded commentators offered a more dramatic theory. That silence itself was a message. In royal communication, absence is never empty. It is intentional. As the alleged leak continued circulating, it inevitably dragged old history back into the spotlight. Their departure from royal duties, the interviews that followed, the documentaries that reshaped public perception, the ongoing tension between truth and institutional loyalty. Every past chapter was reopened, reanalyzed, and reinterpreted through the lens of the current rumor. And with each retelling, the narrative grew heavier. What had once been framed as a clean break was now being reframed as an ongoing emotional negotiation, not an ending, a continuation. Inside the world surrounding Harry and Meghan, the alleged leak reportedly caused discomfort among allies as well. Some insiders, again unnamed, suggested confusion over whether the couple was being targeted or whether internal misalignment had simply become public. Friends of the couple, according to circulating commentary, were said to be cautious about speaking publicly, fearing misinterpretation or escalation. One recurring theme emerged. Everyone was speaking around the situation, not about it. And that silence created even more speculation. At the center of it all lies a simple question. Was there actually a secret exposed at all? Or was it a carefully amplified fragment of information, stretched across social media until it resembled something far bigger than it originally was? In the modern media landscape, the line between leak, rumor, and narrative has become dangerously thin. A single phrase can become a global storyline. A vague claim can become accepted truth, and a suggestion can become a fact through repetition alone. In that sense, the real story may not be the alleged leak itself, but how quickly the world believed it. If there is any truth to the speculation, those closest to the situation describe a familiar pattern: pressure, interpretation, and external noise, magnifying internal decisions. Life in the public eye, especially for figures like Harry and Meghan, is rarely static. It is constantly reframed by commentary, expectation, and scrutiny. Every decision becomes symbolic. Every silence becomes suspicious. Every action becomes analyzed beyond intention. And in that environment, even minor disagreements can appear seismic. Whether the alleged leak is real, exaggerated, or entirely misinterpreted, it has already achieved something significant. It has reminded the world of the fragile balance between public image and private reality. Harry and Meghan remain two of the most scrutinized individuals on the planet, not because of what is confirmed, but because of what is imagined. And imagination, once released, does not return quietly. As the headlines slowly evolve into new stories, one truth remains consistent. The royal rumor cycle never ends. It only changes shape. Today it is an alleged leak. Tomorrow it will be a new claim, a new interpretation, a new exclusive. And Harry and Meghan will remain at the center of it, not always by choice, but by narrative gravity. Because in the modern era of monarchy and media, secrecy is no longer absolute. It is temporary, and every silence eventually becomes a story. The story should have faded. That is how these things usually go. A viral headline burns bright for a day or two, then gets replaced by the next controversy, the next exclusive, the next manufactured crisis. But this time, something unusual happened. It didn't fade, it escalated, and the silence from the people at the center of it all only made the noise louder. In Montecito, the atmosphere reportedly shifted, not in obvious cinematic ways, but in small, almost invisible changes. A canceled appearance here, a delayed statement there, a reshuffled schedule that no one publicly explained. To outsiders, these are meaningless details, but in the world of public figures under global scrutiny, small changes become evidence, and evidence becomes narrative fuel. Online commentators began stitching together timelines, claiming signs of internal strain between Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. One viral post summarized it bluntly. They're not reacting to the leak. They're reacting to each other. Whether accurate or not, it spread faster than clarification ever could. Just when the first wave of speculation began to settle, a second layer emerged. This time, it wasn't just about a leak, it was about control. Anonymous online accounts began circulating a new theory, that the original leak may have been less about exposing secrets and more about influencing perception. Some claimed it was an internal warning shot, an attempt to reset negotiations, reshape narratives, or pressure certain decisions behind the scenes. Others dismissed it entirely as internet fiction feeding on itself. But it didn't matter which version was true, because now there were multiple truths competing at once. And in that chaos, certainty disappeared. As the story evolved, attention shifted more heavily toward Prince Harry, not as a royal figure, but as a man positioned between two identities. One version of the narrative painted him as increasingly concerned about the direction of their public life, especially the balance between privacy and exposure. Another portrayed him as deeply protective, unwilling to allow external forces or media speculation to fracture his family or destabilize their shared goals. What both versions agreed on was this: he was at a crossroads, not dramatic, not public, but internal, where most real decisions are made. A person close to the situation, as described by rumor cycles, not confirmed reporting, put it like this: he's trying to understand what's real and what's noise. And in today's environment, that is no small task. Meanwhile, Meghan Markle's public image continued to move in a different rhythm, structured, deliberate, and forward-facing. Projects were still in motion, business commitments still active, public appearances still carefully managed. But the noise surrounding her name added pressure to every move. Supporters saw strength and composure, critics saw distance and calculation, and the internet saw contradiction everywhere it looked. One recurring theme emerged in commentary spaces. She doesn't react, she redirects. Whether that interpretation is fair or not, it reflects how modern public figures are often understood not by what they say, but by what they don't. Silence becomes strategy. Strategy becomes suspicion. Suspicion becomes storyline. And storyline becomes global perception. Then came the rumor that changed the tone again. An alleged private meeting, not confirmed, not denied, just circulated. According to speculative reports, a high-level internal discussion was said to have taken place involving communication advisors, legal representatives, and trusted inner-circle figures. The purpose? To assess the fallout from the leak and decide whether to respond, ignore, or reshape the narrative entirely. No evidence of this meeting was ever produced publicly, but the idea of it was enough, because in high-profile narratives, possibility often behaves like fact. Outside the couple's immediate circle, media analysts began dissecting something deeper than the leak itself. They started focusing on a broader question. Why do stories like this spread so quickly, even without confirmation? The answer, repeatedly suggested, was emotional architecture. This wasn't just news, it was narrative conflict. A modern royal story carries built-in tension. Institution versus independence, privacy's publicity, tradition's reinvention, loyalty versus autonomy. So when an alleged secret leak appears, it doesn't enter an empty space. It enters a structure already designed for drama, and it fills it instantly. At this stage, the story was no longer owned by any single outlet. It belonged to the internet. Short clips were edited into dramatic compilations. Old interviews were reinterpreted frame by frame. Quotes were stripped of context and reattached to new meanings. Even harmless moments, smiles, pauses, glances, were reanalyzed as coded signals. One viral thread claimed, "If you watch closely, you can see when things changed." No date, no proof, just conviction. And conviction spreads faster than accuracy ever could. Then, unexpectedly, a shift occurred. Not an official statement, not a denial, but a reframing. A subtle change in tone across media coverage. Instead of focusing on drama inside the marriage, some outlets began emphasizing a different angle: media overreach, public obsession, misinformation cycles, narrative distortion. The story was slowly being pulled away from internal conflict and pushed toward external pressure. In other words, the question was no longer, what is happening between them, but what is being done to them by the story itself? Lost in the noise was something quieter. The simple reality that public figures, no matter how famous, still operate in fragments of private life that are not accessible to headlines, hashtags, or commentary threads. A disagreement, even a serious one, does not automatically become a crisis. A leak, alleged or real, does not automatically reveal truth, and silence does not automatically equal confirmation. But in the modern attention economy, nuance rarely survives long. And still, one question refuses to disappear. Was there ever a real secret exposed at all? Or was it a narrative spark, small, incomplete, and quickly amplified into something much larger than its origin? Because now, the story has moved beyond its initial claim. It has become something else entirely. A reflection of how the world consumes stories about power, privacy, and people living under constant observation. And in that reflection, accuracy becomes secondary, emotion becomes primary. As this chapter of the rumor cycle slowly evolves into the next, one thing becomes clear. This is no longer just a story about Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. It is a story about modern visibility, about how quickly private life becomes public narrative, about how fragile truth becomes once it enters the digital current, and about how, once a story like this begins, it rarely truly ends. It simply waits for the next fragment, the next leak, the next exclusive, and the next time the world decides it wants to believe again. By the time the story reached its third wave, it was no longer behaving like a typical royal rumor cycle. It had evolved. What began as an alleged leak had turned into something far more unstable, an ecosystem of competing narratives, each feeding on the other, each claiming fragments of truth, none fully confirmed. And in the center of it all, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle were no longer just subjects of discussion. They were becoming symbols. The tone shift was subtle at first. A headline here, a podcast discussion there, a commentary video suggesting that something irreversible had happened behind the scenes. But then came a new claim, one that pushed the entire narrative into more dangerous territory, that the alleged leak had not just revealed internal tension, but had triggered external consequences, not confirmed, not sourced, but widely repeated. And repetition, in this digital age, often replaces verification. Suddenly, the conversation wasn't just about disagreement, it was about fallout. Observers of celebrity culture often look for loud signals, public statements, dramatic exits, visible conflict. But this time, what people noticed was the opposite: less visibility, fewer appearances, a noticeable tightening of public communication. To some, this suggested control, a deliberate effort to reduce exposure while the storm passed. To others, it suggested strain, a withdrawal from the spotlight while internal matters were being handled privately. But to the internet, ambiguity is never neutral. It is always interpreted as evidence of something hidden. Then came the most explosive rumor yet, a supposed legal dimension. According to circulating speculation, advisors linked to both sides were allegedly assessing whether the leak, or the way it was being interpreted publicly, crossed into reputational harm territory. No documents surfaced, no filings were confirmed. But the idea alone changed the temperature of the entire conversation, because legal language carries weight that gossip cannot match. And once a story enters that space, it stops being rumor entertainment and starts being perceived as real consequence territory, even without proof. Inside the narrative swirl, Harry and Meghan were increasingly portrayed not as individuals reacting to events, but as a unit navigating pressure from every direction. Some commentators described them as strategically aligned but emotionally strained. Others insisted the opposite, that the outside world was projecting conflict onto a relationship that remained unified internally. Both interpretations spread simultaneously. Neither could be confirmed, but both shaped perception, and perception, once formed, becomes resistant to correction. As the speculation intensified, attention once again turned toward Prince Harry. This time, the narrative wasn't about anger or confusion. It was about reassessment. Some alleged that he was becoming more cautious about external narratives, less willing to let indirect sources define their story. Others suggested he was prioritizing stability over visibility, stepping back from anything that might amplify noise. A recurring phrase appeared in commentary spaces: "He's filtering everything now." Whether accurate or not, it captured a broader idea: that once trust is challenged, every input gets re-evaluated. Not everything is accepted at face value anymore. Meanwhile, Meghan Markle continued to operate within a highly structured public communication style: carefully timed appearances, controlled messaging, selective engagement with media platforms. Supporters saw this as professionalism in a hostile environment. Critics interpreted it as strategic silence used to avoid escalation. But beneath both interpretations was a shared reality. She was still present in the narrative, but on her own terms. And that, in itself, becomes part of the tension in any high-profile story, because control over visibility is also control over interpretation. At this stage, the audience no longer behaved like a single crowd. It fractured. 3 dominant camps emerged. 1. The leak is real. Camp believes internal conflict exists, and the leak exposed genuine strain. 2. The manufactured narrative. Camp believes the entire story is exaggerated or shaped by external media interests. 3. The nothing happened. Camp believes the situation is mostly invented noise built on speculation. Each group cited different evidence. Each group rejected the others, and the algorithm amplified all of them equally. Behind the scenes of public discussion, a more important dynamic was unfolding: attention saturation. When a story reaches maximum exposure, it begins to lose clarity but gain intensity. Every new post adds volume, not resolution. Every analysis deepens interpretation, not certainty. And every silence becomes louder than words. For Harry and Meghan, this meant something simple but significant. They were no longer just responding to a story. They were inside it. Then came a strange moment in the narrative cycle, a brief pause. Some outlets, began shifting focus away from internal drama and toward broader royal and media dynamics again. Others doubled down on personal conflict angles, and social media split further into micro-narratives, each one claiming to explain what really changed. But no single version dominated. Instead, the story entered a phase of instability, where multiple interpretations coexisted without resolution, and that is often when narratives become most unpredictable. A quieter commentary thread began gaining attention. It suggested something simple but unsettling. What if the real story is not about Harry and Meghan at all? What if they are simply the most visible surface of a much larger system, one built on attention cycles, narrative recycling, and constant reinterpretation of private lives? In this view, the leak is less important than the reaction to it. The controversy is less important than the consumption of controversy, and the individuals at the center become secondary to the machine around them. As this chapter closes, no final truth emerges. No confirmed leak is validated. No official explanation resolves the speculation. No single narrative becomes dominant. Instead, the story does what modern stories often do. It evolves without conclusion. It shifts shape depending on who tells it. And it waits, quietly, inevitably, for the next spark that will restart the cycle again. Because in the world of global visibility, stories like this don't end. They pause until the next headline breathes life back into them.